Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to begin by congratulating you and also my predecessor and in the chairmanship of the Liquor Committee, as well as the prior staff of the Liquor Committee, because really the bill we have got today is a bill that we have considered in the prior session. And it was a bill that was constructed very carefully over a 4-year period where there were extensive hearings taken across the state, where there were committee meetings, and also with now our recent committee meeting, 2 sets of votes on this bill in essentially exactly the same form. During that time, we, of course, also have heard extensively from all the affected parties, and I can tell you after 18 years in the House that I have a hard time remembering getting more information on a bill than I've received on this bill. Surely some of that's because of my chairmanship, but I know that the average rank-and-file member has received an enormous amount of information on this piece of legislation as well. Like other pieces of legislation that we take up at this time in the early part of the session, we're looking at a bill that we have previously considered and passed out of the House. And so I am not going to go in extensive detail because I know many of you are very familiar with this piece of legislation already. But in summary, I did want to point out for the people that are watching this at home that for the first time we would, since Prohibition, end an outdated idea of having the state be a monopoly to sell at wholesale and retail alcohol. And I think that's absolutely historic and important refocus of the state's purpose on the subject of alcohol, away from a somewhat, in my mind, schizophrenic effort to, on the one hand, encourage people to buy more alcohol, and on the other hand, work with those that are trying to educate for the responsible use and also address the unfortunate problems that occur from alcohol abuse, which are really more appropriately the state's job. And then secondly, to license and control and enforce the liquor laws and regulations so that those that do sell alcohol do so responsibly and follow the law. And again, I think we need to focus more attention in that area and get away from the business of at the same time trying to sell the product. So this bill does a variety of different things that the public has been asking for many years. It creates convenience for those that are using alcohol responsibly so that for the first time, wine, beer, and spirits can be purchased for off-site consumption in the same place. It respects the private beer distributors who have been working with us under license for many years, and it respects their investment by giving them the chance to have a first shot at a discounted price to sell quantities of wine and spirits along with the beer that they're currently selling. It addresses the issue of package reform, which is something we've heard about for many years, allowing beer distributors to sell 6-packs and growlers, which they've been asking for, and also giving restaurants the opportunity to sell in other quantities as well. It allows, through a license, which will be purchased, grocery stores to sell wine. Now, there are other things that I do want to talk about a little bit because there have been some questions and some concerns raised by some of the members or by the public at large. One of the most important ones I know for everyone, given our fiscal situation, is the fiscal impact of this piece of legislation. There are 2 aspects of that. One is the question that's been raised of the value of the system and what we should in turn receive in return for turning the existing public monopoly over to the private sector. I know that the committee in previous years has spent tremendous amount of time looking at licensing and licenses in neighboring states and elsewhere around the country, considering the values that are placed on the wholesale aspect of this, and has derived the numbers that you'll see in this piece of legislation from that effort, and I respect that work. One of the things that is perhaps most important when we're considering the value of any business is the net profit, or in the case of a state entity like this, the surplus that is generated on an annual basis. And I encourage the members to look at the fiscal note that was issued by the Appropriations Committee, and also to consider the numbers that we have received from the Liquor Control Board about what they're expecting to generate over the next few years in the way of surplus. They are very concerning, and I hope all the members pay strict attention to this part in particular, because there's been a considerable amount of misinformation on this subject. In looking at numbers that are being offered by the state store system itself, the LCB, they are projecting, instead of what we had been getting historically of $125 million in 2008, 2009, down to $105 million in 2009-10 and 2010-11, we are looking at a considerable drop in the revenues less expenditures over the next few years. The current year's estimate comes down to 100. In the upcoming year, it's below 100. And then it drops to 87, 62, 40, 25, $7,000 net in 2021 to an expectation of running the system in deficit, where instead of giving money to the general fund will be in a position where they will have to give money to the state store system of $12 million in 21-22. This declining stream of revenue available for the general fund is something that is extremely worrisome. The reason it's happening is that the expenses of the system are growing faster than the income of the system. Many will wonder, isn't there a way to modernize and improve so that we can avoid this problem? But I remind everybody that state-run monopolies are something that are a thing of the past. If you look around the world, let alone the United States, the idea of having a state-run operation where it could otherwise be run by the private sector has been dropped. Certainly, we've seen it in England, where they sold off British Steel. We've seen it in France. We've seen it all through Western Europe, where socialist governments gave up on the idea of running something that is elsewhere run as a private investment. Even Russia and China have given up on the idea of a state-run monopoly running these kinds of businesses. So there's a reason why that's happened. It's happened because the private sector is driven to be efficient. And the private sector, unlike the public sector, is more insulated from political interference, unfortunately by people like ourselves, who sometimes want an entity like the state store system to make decisions for other reasons than what is in their best interest to maximize profit and improve customer service. So asking the Liquor Control Board and the state store system to perform as well as the private sector is simply not going to be effective. Now, I have a number of other concerns that are being raised, I know. One of them is, what is this system worth? And people have suggested that we take a look at the total sales of the system and assume that whatever we sell is the correct number to judge the value of the system. I think anyone who is doing that is not thinking clearly. I ran a business for 20 years. It is not your gross sales that is the value of your business. It is the net profit. If you have a business that sells a relatively small amount of net sales but makes a very high profit on them, that business is worth more than a business that maybe has 10 times the sales but is running in the red. If I'm going to buy a business, I want to see that it is not only profitable today, but it will be profitable in the future. So the critical question is, what multiple of the profits would you expect to be able to receive in return for buying this business? The fiscal note indicates that we are going to get one-time revenues approximately $1.16 billion. Looking at the state store system's own numbers, the next 5 years, their estimate surplus revenues over expenditure averages out to $58.76 million. That would mean that if we adopt this bill, we'll earn something in the neighborhood of 20 times the annual average earnings. 20 times. I'm not an investment expert. I know that when I was looking at my own business, I was looking at maybe a multiple of 7 times annual earnings, possibly 10 if things were looking bright. 20 is a very generous return on this particular asset. There are some other concerns as well, and I think they need to be addressed and thought about. One of them in particular is the question of what is going to happen to the state employees. We definitely want the state employees who are going to be displaced over the next 4 years to have every opportunity to land in a good job. And the incentives that are in place are significant. First of all, it is hoped that some of them will wind up being absorbed within the LCB because the licensing department, I'm assuming, is going to need additional employees to address the new licenses and the control of the enforcement over those licenses. So there should be some jobs there. We are talking a maximum of about 3,000 employees. Some people have said 5,000 employees. That is the entire complement of the Liquor Control Board, and it includes licensing and enforcement people whose jobs are not affected by this. As a matter of fact, they probably will need an increase in their complement. We're offering them preferential hiring at the state elsewhere. If it's a civil service job, we're offering them 3 points on their civil service exam. We're giving them the opportunity for tuition assistance for $1,000 a year if they want to go to school and get new skills part-time, or $2,000 a year if they are going to go full-time. In addition, any employer who picks up one of these separated employees who has been displaced will get a $2,000 a year tax credit against their state taxes for 2 years. That's transferable if the employee changes employment. What we are trying to do here is give them every opportunity to find a new job, train for a new job, or give them an extra advantage in being able to be placed elsewhere. Now, that $2,000 a year tax credit, I think, would be particularly effective for those beer distributors who might want to expand into wine and spirits. The sales clerks at the state store system already have experience selling those products. Some of them I know have taken some time to actually understand wine. They'll be excellent employees for a beer distributor who is unfamiliar with the product line, and they would have the extra advantage of being able to offer that beer distributor the $2,000 a year credit against their taxes. Some of the beer distributors are concerned, though, and I've talked to many of them. They're worried about the environment they operate in today. And in fact, they have been getting new competition they're not used to from grocery stores who have taken out restaurant licenses. That competition is there today. That competition will continue whether we pass this bill or not. The important thing that I would want them to think about is, do you want to compete and take advantage of new tools that are available to you, or do you want not to compete? If you want to compete, we're giving you a tremendous opportunity to get these licenses at a discount and pay for them over 4 years. That's a tremendous advantage for them over the people that are going to come in and buy those licenses later at a much increased cost. If you choose not to be competing because the prospect of restaurant licenses is daunting to you and you're not ready to go into the world of selling wine and spirits, you have another opportunity. You can secure that license, hold it for a year, and then sell it at a substantial profit. So that winds up giving them the opportunity to go into some other form of business that they might prefer. The other questions that I think have been raised are questions of alcohol abuse and the proliferation of the wine and spirits license increasing tremendously the number of outlets. I think everybody ought to think carefully about this one and think about it holistically. Today, we have about 15,000 licensed establishments in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that sell liquor in one form or another. If this bill were to be adopted and fully implemented, there would be 1,200 additional wine and spirit licenses, most of which are probably going to be taken up by the beer distributors who are already selling alcohol. We expect maybe approximately a net of 200 going to new entities that are not currently winding up selling alcohol in one form or another at those locations. Obviously, there also are grocery store licenses in the neighborhood of about 835. About 200 grocery stores are currently selling beer under a restaurant license. So that would mean about an additional 635 licenses there. There is the potential for another up to 600 licenses, depending on the lack of saturation in some of the rural areas and the necessity to provide some additional options for people that are otherwise not finding sufficient opportunity in a reasonable distance to meet their needs. So we're talking about a total of 835 to 1,435 new licenses. But remember, we're also closing 600 state stores. So at the end of the process, we would see somewhere between 235 and 835 new locations or outlets. That winds up being something in the neighborhood of 1.5% to 5.5% of additional locations. Now, some people will tell you we're tripling the amount of locations where people are going to buy liquor, which is going to mean a tremendous increase in liquor access, which is going to mean a tremendous increase in consumption. That really is not borne out by the nature of the way this bill was constructed. And I expect that that will not prove to be the case. We might, in some cases, when we've done things like Sunday sales or some of the other liberalizations that we've done in the past, have actually opened up things more than they were by doing this. And then finally, there's the other question about whether or not we are winding up opening up a can of worms in terms of alcohol consumption and increased drinking. I would point out that the main issue when we're thinking about those issues is how good is our education system and how good is our treatment system. And I think we have more work to do in that area, but that doesn't have anything to do with the nature of where we are currently selling the alcohol. Right now, Pennsylvania is getting 3 out of 5 stars from MAD. Illinois with no state controls along our lines, is getting 5 stars. Georgia, with no state controls, is getting 4 stars. Clearly, merely holding liquor at the state store level is not the answer. We need to look carefully at Illinois and Georgia and go through and imitate the things they're doing well so that we can improve our status. But we can do that in a privatized environment. They've shown us. The CDC's annual average of deaths and alcohol-attributed deaths shows that Pennsylvania is currently on the high end at 3,510. Similar populations to Pennsylvania with non-state control: Illinois, 3,000, Georgia, 2,500, New Jersey, 1,754. There is no reason to just give up and assume that we're going to increase alcohol-related deaths due to DUI. We should, in fact, consider that we do correct enforcement and improve that, and we can do that regardless of the way that we currently hold our alcohol sales. And finally, I want to point out the advantages of enforcement under this bill. Many of the problems we've had with enforcement in the past has been that the fine structure has been too low. And so the bad actors in the license system have tended to simply pay the fine and keep doing whatever they were doing. The nuisance bars just keep going and pay the fine as a cost of doing business. With this bill, we're increasing fines by 5 times to get them into a range where they're more credible. And more importantly, there are 2 other major features, one of which is that we're including the chance to close down for 2 consecutive weekend days a licensee that is persistently committing the worst of the transgressions that a license such as a nuisance bar is currently doing. Closing a business down for 2 days on 2 of their best days of the week is sufficient to get their attention, and I think will make a huge difference. Finally, right now, our state troopers are not in a position to go undercover on the liquor control enforcement. They're meant to be purely in a supervisory capacity. And this creates a great deal of difficulty in some of the nuisance bars because the liquor control enforcement agents stand out like sore thumbs right now. So we're authorizing the state police, without affecting their complement limits, to be attached to the liquor control enforcement process and serve as liquor control enforcement to be able to do undercover to better enforce the law. So, in summation, what we're doing with this bill is moving Pennsylvania forward in a way that the public wants. We're doing it responsibly so that it does not negatively impact the budget. We're doing it at a price that is fair to the licensees that are going to be taking up the business. We're doing it at a price that's right for the citizens of Pennsylvania. We are making important improvements in terms of convenience, improving enforcement, and doing the best we can to be fair to all employees and others affected by this. I won't pretend that it pleases everyone. I know it doesn't. But in a complicated matter like this, there is no way to ever get to a bill that pleases everyone. But again, I respect the work that's been done over the last 4 years that's summed up today, and I hope that the House will see the wisdom of repeating its performance of last session and sending this bill on to the Senate with a positive vote. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.